Thank you again so much, everyone, for being with us today. We are so grateful that you're making time for this important conversation. We are still admitting people, so if you'll just give us one more minute, we'll get started. Thank you for putting your information in the chat. If you've just joined us, we'd love to know your name and where you're joining us from. If you are a Harding colleague or graduate student who is seeking either professional development or micro-credential credit, we'd love your department or program as well as your name. It's so good to see so many familiar names and people there in the chat. Thank you. Thank you so much for being willing to share with us today. And I know Amy and I both hope that the chat will remain very active throughout this entire conversation. I'm ready to get started. Are you ready to get started, Amy? Great. Again, everyone, welcome so much. Yes. Oh, yep. One moment, please. I need to make Amy my collaborator so that she can speak. I think you can unmute now, Amy. Okay, we're
Sorry
ready.
about that.
No,
I
that's
muted
good.
because the 12 o'clock sirens were going on.
Yes,
I couldn't get
that
unmuted.
happens. Yes. Okay, everyone, thank you for making time for this discussion today on gender bias in the workplace. This is our final webinar in the series on workplace culture. I am Andrea Bishop. I direct the Center for Leadership and Development at Harding University. And I'm joined today by my colleague and good friend, Amy Cox, who is someone I admire very much, and I'm so excited to get to share with you today. She's an associate professor for art, architecture, and design here at Harding, and also the associate dean for the College of Arts and Sciences. Amy has been generously and thoughtfully supporting and mentoring and encouraging female leaders at Harding since 2001. Is that when you came, Amy?
Yes,
Yes.
2001.
Well, Amy, I think it was back in July that we kind of started talking about how we might co-present this information on the experiences that women often share in the workplace. And I don't remember if it was you or if it was me or who suggested that we use this book, What Works for Women at Work, as our foundational text, but it has been something I've really enjoyed digging into with you and having good conversations about. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody who is logging in to do this with us today and those that might be watching it later on video. I want to especially thank you, Andrea, for really putting this topic out as a subject that is a very needed conversation. And like you mentioned, these are conversations that I've been having for decades in my career, even before Harding. And I did enjoy this book. I have to admit, it brought back a lot of memories about different moments in my career and different interactions, and how I've navigated them, how others have navigated them. So thank you for doing this. And I hope this is helpful for everyone who's here.
Yes, absolutely. Well, let's go ahead and get started with the underlying premise of this text that we're talking about. And that premise is there are still, even today, really stubborn, very much ingrained assumptions that both men and women hold about gender roles, such as what the typical woman is like or how women should behave. But also, we hold these ingrained assumptions about who is leadership material. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and I want you to think what image immediately comes to mind when you see these words on the screen or you hear business strategist or CEO or corporate lawyer, what image comes to mind for airline pilot or engineer or surgeon or university president? According to Williams and Dempsey, the authors of our book, um, this is what we think of. And this is what our brains are immediately supplying us with. And it's almost always immediately a male representative for positions of power. So our brains have kind of been trained with these assumptions. And according to the authors, very small differences in how men and women are treated can lead to huge pay gaps, to differences in promotions and prestige. And this phenomenon is called an accumulation of disadvantages. And many women early in their careers actually don't notice these differences at all. But as time passes, the differences begin to add up. So, What Works for Women at Work was co written by this mother daughter duo, Williams and Dempsey. They have provided a rich, research driven, authentic, very readable text. It doesn't lean too heavily into politics, doesn't lean too heavily into religion. I just think it's authentic and it's not whiny or doesn't have like a negative tone. And I think, Amy, you let me know if you agree with this, but I think this is a text for both men and women, and that there is plenty of information here that teaches us about these patterns and assumptions that people hold.
I would completely agree with that. I also really like that it is research driven, that they are drawing from women in different professions. Higher ed was one of the, and research was one of the groups that was a part of that study. And so I've read several books over the years about women in the workplace and advice and that kind of thing. And what stood out to me about this one was it is data driven, and I think that alone makes it a really interesting read. And like you said, it's about the entire culture of work, and how the culture could change around these biases and around some of the actions that people are engaging with every day.
Yes, I agree. Well, Amy and I could potentially just talk for over an hour, so we're going to try to stay on task by using this screen as our goals for the webinar. Amy, you want to cover that for us?
Sure, sure. So the researchers took all of that data and they found these four primary themes that are listed here, and we're going to go through each of those: the prove it again, the tightrope, the maternal wall, and tug of war. As I was reading it, I was thinking of a couple of other themes that could have been included, but I do like the framing that they have here. Our goal is to not only just cover the book in kind of a book report type fashion, but to also contextualize it by adding some of our own personal experiences, things that maybe we agreed or disagreed with. And then like we've said, please join in the chat. This is meant to be a conversation. So you can add thoughts, ideas, things that you've experienced or witnessed. And then at the end of the presentation, we're going to draw from the book's strategies that they put forward as to ways in which some of these themes can be addressed in the workplace.
Great. Yes, thank you so much. So let's go ahead and jump straight into that first theme in the book. It is called the Prove It Again bias, and research has shown that a majority of women in the workplace report they must repeatedly prove over and over again that they are competent, that they are trustworthy, while male counterparts are much more often given the benefit of the doubt. So, Amy, one of the points Williams and Dempsey made for this was that everything from hiring standards to promotion standards, men are judged on their potential, so what they might someday be able to do, while women are judged solely on their achievements, what they have already done. And they added that when a man is successful, everyone assumes this is because he has a mastery or a very, wonderful set of skills. But when a woman is successful, her wins are either often overlooked or people assume that she just got lucky. So, um, what can you add to that prove it again principle for us, Amy?
Yeah, so I do see this, and I've seen this in a variety of ways. Just to give everybody kind of context, I've worked in a few different industries. I've been in higher ed for quite some time, 24 years, 23 years. But I've worked in sales, I've worked in the design profession, in small and large organizations, and I would agree with this trend. I think in addition to promotion and hiring, there many times I've experienced kind of an underlying prove it again, even in something as small as a meeting.
Mm,
So early in my career, because I'm was in a position where I held a lot of meetings, I was young, I sounded and looked young, and didn't have that same sort of authority. But I would go into a meeting and I would start the meeting, and as the meeting went on, I noticed that people would slowly begin to pay attention. I
mm,
didn't always get the first initial credit of, oh, we should be listening because this person has something to say or has authority. I see this even later in my career. I've seen this later in my career where I have worked in a situation where maybe initially I was a little underestimated, but as that project or that meeting went on, then there was this what I call the speed bump, kind of like there was like a little bit of alertness that happens during that
mhm.
conversation where they're like, oh, she does know, oh, she is supposed to be in charge here. So it can happen on like a macro level, like you're saying, with career opportunities, but also on a micro level. Um, I'll add as a tangent to this conversation that evidence is also showing that women don't always um, promote themselves. And I know we're going to talk about this in a minute, but the proving it again many times is either due to the fact that women aren't always given the same opportunity to apply for a position or to show their uh, successes in a
Mm,
public way, which may be holding some of that prove it again sort of in a loop, if you will.
yes. I want to sort of follow up with that with one thing, and that is that the irony of the prove it again bias is that it actually only applies to success for women. Um, when women make a mistake, the assumption is not that it was a fluke or that she, didn't get lucky or whatever. When a woman makes a mistake, the mistake was expected, and so it's noticed more often than a man's mistakes, and they are remembered for much longer than when males make mistakes in the workplace. And so the research says that this leads most women to feel like they only have one shot, like we've only got one chance at climbing the ladder. And so the fear of failure is higher for women than it is for men. So let's go ahead and move to the second theme, which is the tightrope. The tightrope is maybe best described as this constant, exhausting balancing act, I think, that women face, where we are constantly finding this balance between being liked, being respected, and being too assertive and being too polite, even between being too feminine and not feminine enough. So, Amy, you and I have talked a lot about finding this balance, especially when it comes to what Williams and Dempsey call office housework. So, their research found that women are much more likely to be expected and asked to do the time consuming, undervalued tasks of the workplace. What can you add to that?
Yeah, what I want to point out here actually, because I do hear this from women and I've experienced it myself, but I want to point out the word asked and expected, that phrase, because there is nothing wrong with any of the things on this list in and of themselves. Where it becomes more bias oriented is when there are assumptions that if there's one woman in the room, then she's the one that's going to take the notes, right? I met with a dean from another university when I was working on my MFA, and we started talking about this. This really came up. She was the only dean in that college, in that university, and she said that she stopped taking a notebook to classes or to her meetings. She just looked around the room and noticed that other people that didn't have a piece of paper didn't get asked to take notes. And because she was frequently being asked, she just didn't provide that opportunity. I don't think I can do that. There's no way I can go to a meeting without something to write on.
Right.
But, and I know we're going to get to suggestions later, but only recently has it really dawned on me that there is a pretty simple solution to this when it comes to uninvited housework. And that is when minutes need to be taken or when something needs to be done, if the person who's in charge, man or woman, can just simply say, would anybody be willing to take notes? Would anybody be interested or have the time or have the bandwidth to do X? To me, if a woman then volunteers to do that, or if a man volunteers to do that, then it doesn't fall into this burden of what the authors are talking about, which is more bias. The other thing that's related to this, and on your slide, I think you had something about like committee work. The Chronicle of Higher Education puts out research in different topics, and this was one of the topics that had a really interesting research background to it. That study showed that in schools, especially schools that have a research element, that women found themselves in a cycle of committee work that didn't lead to what they call academic housework, that didn't lead to promotion activities. And that if you ask a woman to be on one of these committees, she's going to say yes most of the time. She
Mhm.
doesn't always feel like she has that option to say no. And that sense of academic housework, while early in your career, can really be a good way to increase visibility and to get to know people in other programs. I think that's really important, but shouldn't be at the detriment of other projects that may have a meaningful contribution to your university or that would help you on your own projects to become promoted or to do scholarship. So.
Right. And I think that women are asked to be on the committees that are less important in academia specifically. And so there's a lot of different committee work in higher education. I mean, there's incredibly important committee work, and then there's the more mundane. And it's not that we don't want to be included in committee work, it's just we want a seat at the table for the important things as well. I think that is the point. So. But I also think this is a really good place to add the additional wrinkle of a woman, a Christian woman working in a Christian environment, especially one like ours, where women have traditionally been told that our role is to be a helpmate, to serve, and to work behind the scenes. So when a woman has been raised or conditioned to be unseen and unheard in mixed company with men, then walking this tightrope for a strong female leader is even more difficult. Anything to add to that, Amy?
Yeah, I would echo that. The visual that comes to my mind is in this environment, the tightrope becomes even more narrow because at that point, the tightrope may look like church and work, and we're walking that tightrope.
Yes.
I would add to that, one of the things that I think I've observed and have experienced is visibility. So, because in our religious settings, women are less visible, there really needs to be a concerted effort, I believe, in a work setting to make sure that women are being seen and giving them opportunities to be seen. And I believe that at least our institution has done that in a much better way in recent years. I think it's improving in that area, but it does mean you have to be very conscious, and then not to belabor this too much, but to kind of loop back to what you said about fear of failure, or the sense that you have one shot. I believe that then leads women, and I'm speaking for myself. I don't want to pretend to speak for everybody, but that leads me personally to over prepare because I don't know if I'm going to have another opportunity to be visible or to speak to others or to serve in a certain way. And so I was in I watched a presentation by a group of four presidents of different types of universities. They were all women. It was moderated by the President Baylor, and all four of those women had that same concern that if I fail here, I may not get another chance. So
Yeah.
this is pretty prolific.
Yes. Thank you for that. Well, let's go ahead and move on to the third theme from the text. I want to make sure we have time to get to our suggestions and strategies. So that third theme is called the maternal wall, and this is workplace bias that working mothers and job-seeking mothers face. It's rooted in the assumption that a mother will not be as devoted to work as men, even as fathers, and not as devoted as women who are not mothers might be. So the statistic that jumped out to me from the text was that in a study when hiring managers were given two identical resumes, one belonging to a mother and the other belonging to a non-mother, the mother was almost 80% less likely to be hired. And if by some miracle she was hired and was in that 20%, the mother was only half as likely to be promoted. So, Amy, you and I are both moms. You've got two grown daughters. I've got two practically grown men, sons. So, I think we can probably both speak to this experience. Do you have anything you could share?
Yeah, I definitely think this is both an organizational struggle as well as an internal struggle for me. Trying to Again, it's another tightrope, right? Trying to win at everything and trying to be a good mother and be accessible to them, but also do my job. So we're already many times kind of beating ourselves up for it, and then to face bias is just an added complication. I had an experience once when I was in sales and I was pregnant, obviously pregnant, and we were presenting to a potential client, and the committee kept saying, so we need to make sure whoever we're working with is going to be available for the course of this long project, couple of years. And we kept reassuring them, yes, we will be available. I will be available. And our company was really well suited for the project. And as that question kept coming up, it dawned on me kind of what the issue was. And on the drive back, I was talking to my colleagues and I said, I think I was the wrong person to put in front of them. I don't think that they believe that I'm going to come back from work.
Mm,
And we didn't get the project. And I can't say that that was the only reason, but I sensed that. And so I think this is an area that is improving in most companies with flexibility post-COVID. I think there's been some studies where women have a little more flexibility than they had before, but the bias, I think, still in many cases remains,
yes.
which is hard.
Yeah,
Um,
it is. It is. I'm going to put that slide back up because I want to talk just really briefly about those two forms of bias, the hostile and the benevolent. Um, I've had experiences in my career with both hostile forms of bias and the benevolent forms of bias as a mom. And to be completely honest, I prefer the hostile form because it's easier for me to identify, first of all, but it's also easier to push back against. Some of the sweetest, most well-meaning people in my life who I know like love me and want the best for me have tried to make decisions on my behalf because they assumed I would be needed at home. I would be needed as a mom. And so, I missed out on opportunities to participate in projects or collaborative writing for an article or even a conference because other people made the decision for me. And that would be an example of that benevolent bias. Before
Well,
we,
and it was mentioned in the book too that some in this scenario, if women feel that they'll just stop sharing anything about their personal life, they'll stop sharing even details about their children. In the book, they mentioned some women don't even bring pictures of their kids to work because they feel like it might create some sort of bias. That's terrible. I mean, that's unfortunate,
yes,
you know. It's
yes, it
not the kind
is.
of workplace I think that most of us have, but I do think this still happens, in certain
Yeah,
areas.
yeah. Well, I want to add one more little caveat with that. And so in the book, they highlight that while women's mistakes are noticed, you remember we talked about that a minute ago, they're noticed and they're remembered so much longer than male peers' mistakes. People are also particularly primed to remember instances when a mother's family duties interfered with their work and then to hold it against them later. And this was a point in the same section of the book where the author said something like, um, the ideal worker is expected to be fully devoted to work, while the ideal mother is expected to be fully devoted to her children. And so, because of that, motherhood is actually perceived by a lot of people to be incompatible with high levels of work effort. So, people believe that motherhood disqualifies women from leadership positions. Anything to add to that?
No, I would just echo that. I mean, and
Yeah.
again, it doesn't at the bottom of at kind of the root of this is that people shouldn't make assumptions
Yes.
that someone is not capable of doing something based on what they perceive as their own on their work-life balance. And I see now, I have colleagues who are men who are very dedicated to the activities of their children who are,
Sure.
going to those things. So I think it goes both ways, but I do agree with this concept of just potentially it damaging your career when
Mm,
when that's perceived as a weakness.
yeah. Okay, so let's jump into that final theme of the book. And honestly, this is the one that makes me the most sad, but also the most frustrated. And this is called the tug of war bias, and it is described as gender bias that occurs when women compete against one another for limited career opportunities because they believe, and also because it's often true, that there's only room at the top for, one or two women. And this makes me sad because I've seen it and I've unwillingly experienced it. It makes me frustrated because it shows another double standard. And that is the fact that men are expected to compete, to be driven, to be aggressive and competitive, while women are not, right? So when women compete, it often is perceived as unbecoming, as petty. And when women compete or have, especially when they have workplace conflicts, those conflicts can be mocked or belittled. We would never mock men for having an argument at work. Um, but we definitely do this with women. So, Amy, anything to share with that?
Yeah. I I think that at least in my experience, it hasn't been a blatant just like if anybody remembers the movie Working Girl,
Yeah.
where the the woman who had clawed her way to the top in a very competitive situation was intentionally blocking her subordinate. But I do think it happens unconsciously and sometimes just passively, where maybe you're not as encouraging to put a female's name forward for a committee or for something like that. I also think that the tug of war idea about ambition, and you didn't use the word ambition, but I will use the word ambition, because an ambitious woman is not always seen as aligning with those more feminine, even kind of traits or those feminine qualities. And the idea when someone hears the word ambitious woman, sometimes that sends a message that's negative versus if you hear ambitious man.
Yeah.
And so I would just encourage us all, myself included, to guard against that. I do think the generation coming up behind us doesn't have as much of that stigma, and I'm really proud of them for that. I've talked to my students about that quite a bit, especially my female students. But when they hit the workplace, they're going to need to understand what some of those stigmas might be.
Yeah. Yes. Um, the one thing that popped in my head while you were talking is that when men argue, which they do at work, I mean that happens, disagreements happen all the time. Men don't get told to stop being dramatic or to stop bickering. And when the role is reversed and it's women, those are the things that we hear, like the stop being dramatic. Like that is one of my pet peeves. So anything to add
Well,
to that?
that then that then takes the conversation into being able to express emotion at work, whether it's being angry, whether it's being disappointed, whether it's disagreeing, even in a meeting. I, there's a narrative that kind of a guard that a lot of women
Mm,
have. I know I've done this where I've very carefully and thoughtfully chosen my words and the way I'm going to say something to not come across as being overly dramatic
yeah,
or confrontational, or it's a skill set that a lot of women have developed over the years in order to progress in their
right.
leadership type of
Yeah,
model.
yeah. Being very, very careful about what you say and when you say it because you want it to have power. And if we talk too much, we get ignored.
Yeah.
So just being very intentional about that. That's been a
And
strategy of
again,
mine.
some of this advice is good for anyone. I mean, it's not
Absolutely.
just women, like more thoughtfully considering how you deal with confrontation or, but if you're diminishing your own personality or you're doing it to, at a detriment to your own career, I think that's definitely where it has to be
Yeah.
considered and
Yeah.
thought about.
Yeah. Well, we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but I know there are some people on our call today who are probably at the beginning of their careers. They maybe haven't experienced any of these biases yet. So, what advice can we give to a young person, regardless of gender, who's in the first few years of their career that might help them navigate this sort of thing when they do see it?
Are you mean in general, like all of these biases, all these trends? Yeah. My advice would be to be alert, but not to be overly worried. So, for instance, being vigilant that, oh, this might be something that I need to consider, or when you encounter something that you now feel like might be related to your gender, especially if it's unfair, um, think about that, process that, use strategies, talk to people, but don't walk through your career just waiting for landmines,
Yes.
and being cautious all the time. I was gave the example when we were talking the other day, and everybody is familiar with this concept of when a woman leaves a store, let's say at night, she's walking out into a parking lot. There's a heightened awareness, right? That, and maybe men feel this too, but I know among women, this is a concern of you put your keys in your fingers, or you're looking around, you're really being very, or the fake phone call. I don't know if anybody's done the fake phone call. But that vigilance, that, okay, I might be stepping into something here that I need to have a heightened awareness. um, that's that's how women feel a lot in the workplace. Is I'm having to think sometimes about things that maybe my counterparts don't think about. my hope is that in conversations like this, that while we're helping to train younger women how to navigate these things, my hope is that we won't need to continue to train and how to navigate these things, that
Mm,
our culture will change in our workplace, and that just by talking about it, that some of these biases will be all be alerted to it, myself
yes.
included.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think this is probably a good time for us to maybe transition. We've sort of already done that, but be more intentional about offering some strategies from the book, but also from our own experiences, things that we can do when bias happens. So, audience, while we're doing this, we would really, really love for you to share any tips or strategies that have worked for you in combating bias. If you've experienced that, please put those in the chat and we can look at those in a minute. One of my primary takeaways from the text was this very simple reassurance that my feminine behavior is not weak and any masculine behavior I might present in any situation is not wrong. So my tendencies to empathize, to go out of my way to communicate effectively, to remember people's birthdays, to share experiences, to really want to share experiences with my coworkers. Those feminine traits, they make me who I am, but they also make me a better person. And while women are, we're going to have to walk that tightrope of balancing femininity and masculinity in certain situations, we need to know that being feminine is okay and it's in no way being less. And what makes us who we are is good. And we just can be the best version of ourselves in the workplace. So that was my primary takeaway. Amy, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, and I think the masculine, feminine, label is somewhat unfortunate, right? And I run myself. I've started running a little test in my mind when I feel like um, I'm hearing something from a woman in a way that maybe sounds more aggressive or pushier or
Mm,
something that would be traditionally considered masculine. And I try to imagine if this were coming from a man and this exact conversation was coming from a man in the same tone and that sort of thing, would it change anything?
mm,
And so I love that men and women are now better understanding traits in general, and that they don't necessarily have to be assigned to just one gender.
yeah,
And I too, like you, I feel like tapping into both sides of these kind of traditional uh, masculine, feminine. I think that makes better leaders just in general,
yeah,
no matter who you are.
definitely. Okay, so Amy, can you take this one about strategic self-promotion? Yeah.
Yeah. So like we were saying before about prove it again, this ties into this pretty well. And I liked some of the points that they were making in the book because I don't think it's something that we often talk about and advise women with. This idea of keeping your accomplishments at your fingertip. Um, Bragging, of course, is something that is many times a negative thought, but pointing out your accomplishments are important. I have Dr. Wilhoit, Dr. Sarah Wilhoit, years ago would tell me, you need, I would do something. She's like, put that on your Vita, put that on your Vita. And I appreciated that. That made so much sense. You can get so busy just doing that work, especially if it's kind of behind the scenes work. One of the things I'd point out here is translating your accomplishments into objective measures, things like, well, since I've been fill in the blank, since I've been chair, our department has grown by 20%, or
Mm,
these come in very handy in interviews. And I think it would be important in an interview to lead with accomplishments, even though I think for some women the tendency is to deflect
yeah.
the success onto other people. But I still
Right.
think that's a very important thing.
I do not know where I read this, but I picked something up several years ago that for people like me who feel uncomfortable with self-promotion, one strategy is to share what you learned with the win. So, for example, instead of saying, the program I created has a record enrollment this year, you might say, as I work toward that record enrollment this year, these are the things that I learned along the way. And so you're sharing the success, but you're also offering some some things that people actually will value, especially if they're going to be useful for them as well. And so sort of combining what you learned with the success is a strategy that makes me feel a little bit more comfortable, and maybe it's a little bit more savvy
Yeah.
self-promotion. I really love that language that you provided for that, Amy.
Yeah.
So I know Amy and I both wish we could show you like every section of the book where the authors have provided really fun phrases or suggestions to use. There are too many. But this is one of my favorites. Several times in my career, I've been in the room, often as the only woman in the room, when the rest of the group was debating the merits of a male and a female for a project, for a promotion, for an award of some sort. And more than one time, I have heard men value the accomplishments of men more than the accomplishments of women. Often, when the playing field itself is not fair, it's already skewed heavily towards a male candidate. So, the example I want to provide for that is it may sound funny, but I think it's a good example. I have tried to learn how to drive a stick shift 3 times in my life. First time in high school, my dad tried to teach me. Second time in high school, a former boyfriend tried to teach me. Third time, before I got married, my now husband tried to teach me. I was not successful in any of those attempts. But the reason why is in all of those vehicles, I was on a bench seat that would not allow me to move close enough to the pedals for my feet to touch the pedals. And so I'm almost 5'2". I claim 5'2", but I'm not actually there. I'm short, my legs are short, and the playing field for me in that situation was not something that I could be successful at. And that happens a lot in um, corporate America, where the playing field is just not as equal for women. And so if women have that, something happens to them where they think they were passed over and someone else was approached for something, then the advice here, and I want to really state this strongly, number one, you go to your leadership and let them know that you want you're aspirational, you're interested in a promotion or in a project or whatever. You let them know, but then you also ask, what are those metrics? What do I need to do so I
Mhm.
can get what this person got? Like, we want to confront the bias with confidence. We want to shine a light on it. We do not want to be dramatic in those moments, but when we're calm and we're confident, we're much more likely to be heard. Amy, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just echo all of that. Not knowing what the rules are means that you don't have the opportunity to play, and
Yeah.
that you're not always considered for that. I wanted to point out a comment that Taylor, my co-teacher and friend, had made this comment that as an ally, being a man, he tends to if he notices a female colleague is being spoken over, which happens, or her ideas not being acknowledged, then he has that opportunity to amplify that. Literally interrupt the conversation and say, actually, I think she just made a really good point. Can you repeat that?
Yeah.
I
Yes.
think that's such a great idea.
Yes.
Thank you, Taylor, for that, and I appreciate that. So,
So I think we have one more strategy to share. We are starting to get short on time, Amy. So just
okay.
you and I both, we like to talk. Um, so this strategy is what happens, and you sort of just mentioned this, but what happens when someone talks over you, but especially when someone takes your ideas? These are some things that you can say in that situation. And I can share from personal experience last week, when I used, I think, all of these. I was um, I was on a committee of 8 faculty members from 8 different universities, and we were all working to evaluate course materials. And so during the day, we would do our work, and we would use a shared document where we would kind of provide suggestions. And then our last meeting of the day, we would talk through and try to come to consensus. And every day, um, a man from another university would use the language that I had put in the document. He would say it to the lead reviewer of this committee. And every day I had to use one of these sayings to kind of be able to say, dude, that was my work. You can't take the work that I put. It happens. I don't know. It happens. I just want to bring that up. These are good strategies to use. So, Amy, I'm going to give you this one to cover, and then we will start to wrap things up. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the addressing the tug of war, I think even beyond this being a strategy for tug of war, I think these are just fantastic things to do. I mean, obviously being more direct is always going to have a clearer path or a better effect. But respecting each other's experiences, collaborating, advocating, this can be done by anyone. And I do think spending the time to get to know other women. I know this is something that has been important to me, and other women have sought me out. But spending time to have connections and then using those connections in order to help each other in their careers. And I think that is something that can be done by everyone, no matter what level you're in or that kind of thing. I think it's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. A few years ago, I heard about the Arkansas Council for Women in Higher Education and joined that group. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's women in higher education in Arkansas. I have found it to be incredibly um, supportive. It's a wonderful group, a very diverse group of women, and it has allowed me to have some conversations that I might not have ordinarily had. Um, and I think sometimes when we experience bias, there's like this shame, or we wonder if it's only happening to us. But when you have those conversations, you realize it's not just me. And I don't know, I think it just gives us a little bit more power to push back against it. So
And just
I think,
raise awareness. Sorry, go ahead.
yes, no, absolutely. I mean, that's why we're doing this today is we want to share our experiences, but we also want to raise that awareness. So I mentioned earlier, I think that strategy of like sharing what I learned along the way when I self-promote. Have you got anything specific that you use, like some strategies that you use for any of this that you could share with us?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I have found it to be very effective that once I have built a strong relationship with especially somebody who um, I report to or somebody who is in a leadership position that I am becoming more confident to point things out in a
Mm,
very thoughtful way, to say, hey, that meeting we were just in? I don't know if you noticed this, but this is something that I observed. And I have found that to be really well received. It's one-on-one, it's very humble, but also not letting things just slide by. And I understand that I'm in a position now to be able to do that maybe I wasn't in a few years ago. But the hope would be that if more of us were having conversations with our colleagues in that strategy of, hey, I saw this. I don't know if you saw this. What are your thoughts? Or did you also feel that way? not to just complain or gossip or go behind people's backs, but to really start to develop collectively some strategies, which I think
Yeah.
can again institute change that would be more of a culture change
Yes.
across your whole organization.
Yes, absolutely. Audience, we would love to know your strategies, your tips. If you have one, please throw it in the chat for us. While you do that, I have to promote my next webinars. We are not having one in December because the university will be gone for the holidays. So our next one will be in January, and I'm really, really excited about it. We're going to be starting a new series called Leadership Stories. And so each month in the spring, January through June, each guest will share important leadership lessons that they've learned from a wide variety of experiences. So our first guest will be Dr. Jack Schock, one of my favorite humans on the planet. And he's going to use his experiences during the aftermath of 9/11 when he was boots on the ground. He's going to share leadership lessons from that experience. You can scan that QR code to register. You can also email maol@harding.edu, and I'll send you the info for that. But I didn't want to not share that with our group today.
Love Jack Shock. He's
Oh,
amazing.
yes, 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 yes. Well, let's look at the chat and see if anyone has provided. We've got something from Russ Davidson. Can I just say that there are some people like your Taylor? I've got a Russ, and I've got other people like that in my life who are definite advocates and support me in everything I do, and that is Russ. So thank you for this comment, Russ. He has said, I agree there's a tightrope that many women have to navigate. And I love the simple advice of being aware while also stressing the importance of not looking for that next landmine. Yes. I mean, it's kind of hard, honestly, to work at that level where you're not looking, but you're aware. It's a balance, it's another balancing act. So thank you for that comment. We would love to hear from somebody else. As we wrap things up, Amy, do you have any final words?
Other than just thank you. Thank you for picking this topic. Thank you for inviting me. There is another text and I didn't write it down, but if you're in higher education, there's another book that I found that have found really practical and useful. And I believe it's called The Nine Principles for Women in Higher Education. While you're wrapping up or talking about the comments, I'll pull it up on my Audible because that's how I do books. And
Yes.
then I
Yeah,
will
yeah.
read that with you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sheila, for that. Thank you, Melanie. Everyone who's put comments in the chat, we appreciate that. Sometimes it feels like we're just talking to ourselves or to no one, and it's really nice to know that people are listening. Thank you to Zach. When people are using negative self-talk around you, what are the strategies to help those people change their thinking? Do you have a response to that, Amy?
Ooh, that's a lot. That's that careful sort of uncovering of what's at the bottom, what's at the root of the negative talk, like what's really going on. Yeah. What do you think?
I think that's one of those examples where you say, so can you tell me about why you're saying that? I mean, can you explain to me what's going on? Number one, just noticing that they're talking like that is good, but inviting them to share their experiences with you is it's above and beyond, and it's very much appreciated. So we would love for that sort of thing to happen. Thank you, Kathy, for that. And John, thank you. Think we're gonna, did you get the name of the book, Amy?
Yeah, the name of the book is The Nine Guiding Principles for Women in Higher Education, and it is by Karen Sproles. What I liked about it is the maternal bias. She talks even about that in course evaluations and how students' expectations of how a female teacher, a woman teacher is different than their expectations for a man. And they sometimes get negative evaluations if they don't fit a certain model. There was anyway, there are 9 principles. That's just one of them. So I
Yeah,
do recommend that book as well,
that's awesome.
especially if you're in
Thank
higher
you.
education.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, people, we're going to wrap it up. I'm going to share that slide one more time for those of you who might want to grab that QR code. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for, seriously, thank you for making time in your day to learn more about this, for caring enough to want to learn more. We really appreciate that. And it's people like you who make changes happen. So thank you so much. We're going to stop the recording and say goodbye.
Thank you
Thank you.
all.
Bye.
Bye.